opinion on Sky News Australia starts now. This is Outsiders.
Good morning and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers of Australia. My own mother Claire, whom I love, happy Mother's Day. My great friend Rita here, happy Mother's Day, Rita. And to all of you outsiders, mums out there, we love you all. Welcome to Outsiders, the show that is to woke virtue signalling and identity politics on steroids. What US Republican Senator Lindsey Graham is to exposing the cowardice and lack of moral clarity in the Biden administration's disgusting actions withholding weaponry from Israel in their fight against Hamas.
Are you worried that if you make a decision to deny weapons that Israel say they need, that it would send a signal to Hamas and Iran to keep pushing?
Senator, we want to make sure that we're providing the right kinds of weaponry.
Okay. Would you have supported dropping the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, General Brown, to end World War II?
Well, Senator, I think it's just based on the situation where
Well, we know. I mean, it's happened. We know. I'm not asking. They did it. Do you think that was disproportionate?
Oh, yes, it seems that America's top brass under Joe Biden would actually support taking decisive military action to defeat a deadly enemy.
If we go back in time and says, hey, we got 2 atomic bombs, should we drop them? What would you say?
Well, you know, I think the leadership was interested in curtailing the...
Well, what's Israel interested in? Do you believe Iran really wants to kill all the Jews if they could? The Iranian regime, yeah. Do you believe Hamas is serious when they say we'll keep doing it over and over again? Do you agree that they will if they can?
I do, Hamas.
Okay, right. Do you believe that Hezbollah is a terrorist organization also bent on the destruction of the Jewish state?
Hezbollah is a terrorist organization.
Okay, so Israel's been hit in the last few weeks by Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, dedicated to their destruction. And you're telling me you're going to tell them how to fight the war?
Can anybody else believe that Lindsey Graham is the voice of moral clarity? But it looks like West Point must be choosing their top cadets these days based on moral relativism and cultural Marxism.
Do you still think it was a good idea, General Austin, to get out of Afghanistan?
I support the president's decision.
Yeah, I think you do. I think it was a disastrous decision. If we stop weapons necessary to destroy the enemies of the state of Israel at a time of great peril, we will pay a price. This is obscene. It is absurd. Give Israel what they need to fight the war they can't afford to lose. This is Hiroshima and Nagasaki on steroids.
There you go. Well said, Senator. And now, while the Biden administration stumbles around from one embarrassment to the next, let's grab the latest Outsiders news. So, Rita and James, Australia yet again, under Penny Wong, has embarrassed this nation, disgraced this nation, siding against Israel and with Israel's enemies, Rita.
Yes, decided not to vote with our greater allies, Israel and America, decided not to abstain, decided to vote against our greater allies and effectively award Hamas for the murderous behaviour we have seen October 7 and since then and before then. They maintain that this is not rewarding Hamas. In fact, Penny Wong was at great pains to explain this is the opposite of what Hamas wants. Yes, Hamas wants to eradicate entirety of Israel. They want every Jew gone, but it is still rewarding them. It's not giving them everything they want, but it's giving them more than they already had.
Let's have a listen to this attempt at justification by the Australian Foreign Minister.
I want to say this is a clear rejection of the goals and methods of Hamas. A two-state solution, both Israel and Palestine, is the opposite of what Hamas wants. Hamas does not want peace, and it does not want long-term security for the state of Israel.
How on earth is this a rejection of Hamas? I mean, coming from, Penny Wong, I think we can understand that you can make these sort of moral backflips, but it is unbelievable to listen to this nonsense. I mean, the only way that you can go about talking about any sort of two-state solution is to say that first, Hamas must be eliminated. They have absolutely zero place in any future Palestinian governance organization, set up, whatever they wind up doing. So 2 states, fine, but get rid of Hamas first. But I've got some breaking news here. The Washington Post has just reported in the last few minutes that the Biden administration, and we'll be talking about them a bit later on in the program, working urgently to stave off a full-scale Israeli invasion of Rafah, is offering Israel valuable intelligence on Hamas targets, where their military are, where the leaders are, and where their tunnels are. So the Biden administration has been withholding back intelligence from Israel. They never thought Israel would press the case so far to go into Gaza and get rid of Hamas, and they always thought that, well, we don't need to give them this information. The Biden administration stands accused now of protecting Hamas and Iran. They've played this double game from the very start of their administration. This goes back to the Obama days, and Joe Biden, whose side are you on? This is the urgent question everybody needs to ask right now.
I think we all know Joe Biden doesn't know what day it is, let alone whose side he's on.
Fine, but
this
still
is the continuation of that Obama administration. Whoever's pulling the Biden
puppet strings.
I mean, he is a puppet. He would have no idea. He would have no decision-making here. But the bureaucracy, the swamp, whatever you want to call it, it is that continuation of the Obama regime. And we know the Obama regime was fully invested in Iran, doing the Iranian deal, emboldening Iran. And we had a few years of respite from that under Trump, but they've gone back to it. And this is why we're in this situation.
There is real serious concerns about who is even in the Biden administration making foreign policy. You know that the special envoy on Iran has had his security clearance revoked because of concerns about, well, we don't know exactly what yet, but I mean, the fact that Iran has had such a massive intelligence effort trying to penetrate the United States, and we see this with their influence operations that play out on campuses and elsewhere, this is really sinister stuff here,
Totally. The reality is Israel has to defeat Hamas, has to go in there, has to take out the entire terror network and finish it for all time. Only then will there ever be peace in the Middle East, once the terrorists are destroyed. And the idea that the Biden administration is running around, we saw earlier those various top brass saying, oh, we think maybe they could have this weapon but not that weapon. Now they're trading which bits of intelligence they're going to give. Absolute disgrace. Donald Trump has come out and he said very, very clearly that the entire Biden administration's approach, not only to Israel but throughout the Middle East, is an absolute disgrace. Let's go back to Australia. Here's Penny Wong again, trying further double flips. I mean, she should be in the circus doing on a trapeze, the way she manages to twist the facts around. The reality is, folks, Australia, over the weekend on Friday, has voted in the United Nations to push towards the recognition of Palestine as a state. Here's Penny Wong trying to justify this. This goes against everything. This is rewarding terrorism, as Tony Abbott has pointed out. And Scott Morrison has come out with a terrific statement saying this is the most hostile act by any Australian government in history towards Israel. Well done, Scott Morrison. Absolutely true. Here's Penny Wong again, backflipping, doing whatever she does.
This vote is not about whether Australia recognises Palestine. We will do that when we think the time is right. What we would say, and what I do say, is Australia no longer believes that recognition can only come at the end of a peace process. It could occur as part of a peace process.
This is insane. This is completely
know what she
insane.
voted on?
It makes no sense whatsoever. She says, we're not voting for a recognition of Palestine, of the Palestinian state, but that's what you just voted for. And along with Iran and Tajikistan and China and Russia, that's who you voted for. Canada didn't vote for it. The UK didn't vote for it. Even Papua New Guinea didn't vote for it, yet Australia has sided with the worst of the worst. This is a complete rejection, if you like, of our friendship with Israel, and it is a rewarding of terror and a rewarding to Hamas, encouraging them to go forward. Now, this is a disgrace. Australia stands utterly embarrassed. I'll be talking more about that later. James.
Well, I was just going to say, it really occurs to me here that when you listen to the way that they play this double game here, Penny Wong's playing the same sort of thing here.
Yep.
Put aside all the domestic political concerns which are driving a lot of this Labour policy right now. We can talk about that later. But the other thing, too, is that it is so ironic to me that so many people on the left side of politics love to pay lip service to the idea of democracy being under threat, the West being under threat, Russia, China, whatever. But when it comes to Israel, and here we have a democracy, a liberal democracy that is under existential threat, and a friend of ours, under existential threat by a murderous, totalitarian, thuggish regime with the strings being pulled in Iran, a murderous, thuggish, theocratic regime that hates not just Jews, but the entire West, including democracies like ours. Their rhetoric on other issues where democracy and West and the freedom is under threat really falls completely flat. This blind spot that they have on Israel, and I think it comes from the left, not only that there's this anti-Semitism on the left, but also that throughout the left there's a real rejection of the Western Enlightenment project. They don't like it, they don't trust it,
of course
and
they don't.
They want to see...
and I'll be talking about that a little bit after the break, but... Of course, there are domestic considerations here. There are a lot more Muslim voters, and they're often concentrated in seats held by Labor. They're worried about a backlash there. We saw similar concerns in the UK. But I think it goes deeper than that with Labor and the left in general. This is in their DNA. They do have this anti-West sentiment, this neo-Marxist mind frame where they look at everything.
They lapped it up in university, Rita.
And that's why... This shouldn't shock us. It might disappoint us, but it shouldn't shock us because this is who they are.
This is who they are. Josh Burns, the Jewish Labour Member of Parliament, has come out. So, Penny Wong, congratulations, Albo. Well done. You've managed to alienate and split left-wing Jews from the Labour Party. He's come out with a strong statement opposing the decision by Penny Wong, the vote by Australia in the United Nations. I say again, I've said it many times before, Labour, the Greens and the Teals are no friend of the Jews in this country. If you are a supporter of Israel, supporter of Judaism, Jewish connections to Judaism, whatever, you should not and must not be voting Teal, Green or Labour because they are not your friend, they are your enemy. Understand that clearly. That is why we have elections, and that is why this mob must be turfed out at the next election, along with the Teals. Let's talk about the budget. Ooh, how exciting. We've got a Labor budget on Tuesday. I can't wait. What are they going to do to destroy the economy this time? Oh, by the way, you can't make a Mars bar in this country. It's too expensive. Mars have gone, we can't afford the energy here. We can't afford the wages here. We can't do business here. We're going to go off to other countries around the world where we can make Mars bars. That is the reality of Labor's future made in Australia. It means a future disappearing, manufacturing disappearing from Australia. That's what this Labor government is doing, whether it's high-tech businesses, whether it's renewables businesses, they are going out of business. We'll get more of it on Tuesday,
But Rowan, it's called the Future Made in Australia Fund. How could what? The name doesn't match the actual reality. I'm shocked. This is an expansionary budget at a time where we don't need an expansionary budget because the last thing we need is further inflationary pressure that's going to keep interest rates up. There's now talk that the next interest rate move is going to be up, not down. We were expecting 2 to 3, perhaps 4 cuts this year. I don't think anybody thinks that's going to happen now. So we've got people tightening their belts. The interest rate rises are definitely having an impact. Anyone who's buying a home or even renting, rents have gone up. So the people are tightening their belts, but the government is spending like drunken sailors and adding to that inflationary pressure. I just cannot understand why you would deliver this sort of budget in this current environment.
But what, James, what in anything they've ever done since Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister gives the Labor Party, in particular Jim Chalmers and Anthony Albanese, the ability to believe that they can pick successful businesses? They've never held a job in their lives. I mean, Anthony Albanese was a DJ spinning records or something or other. None of them have ever worked in a business. None of them have ever seen a spreadsheet. None of them ever had to sit there and actually make the numbers add up so that people get paid and people make a profit. They've never done it. And yet they're sitting there picking winners for the future industrialisation and manufacturing industries in this country. What a joke. This is a farce, James.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, the whole Future Made in Australia policy it's a nonsense. I mean, first of all, it's going to be one of these sort of off-books funds, so it doesn't wind up counting against the budget. You know, there's all these accounting tricks that they use. But beyond that, you know, manufacturing in Australia is a very tricky thing. And the thing is with Jim Chalmers is I think that he is smart enough to know that he's got a problem here. He knows that what he's doing here, he's being forced to drive with one foot on the gas and the other foot on the brake here because, you know...
I mean, he's not in an EV,
well, no, what he's doing, guys, is that he's got this situation where, on the one hand, he's got the net zero and Chris Bowen and everything making everything more expensive, and that's driving up inflation. So then he's got to throw more money at that to counteract that, but then throwing more money into that creates more inflation, which creates more interest rate pressure. And at the same time, also the other thing to watch, you know, they're going to just straight up lie to us about cutting immigration in this budget because we know the last time they said, oh, well, it's going to come down to whatever, and it did not come down at all. It's at record highs. That's all pressure everywhere, which is another huge political problem for this government. But you know, this is the whole contradiction. The whole budget here is going to be absolutely filled with contradiction. A lot of people are going to fall for it. They're going to say, oh, you know, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Most businesses fail in the private sector. When you add a public sector element onto it, which they're trying to do with manufacturing, it's ridiculous. We already have seen a foretaste of the silliness of this. You know, the quantum computer that they're going to pay $1 billion for, that's actually going to be owned by the Americans. Yeah, you know, we're going to build solar panels here when China's got the whole market with cheap labor, and they can do it for 1/10 the price, and the world is already slave labor, and and the whole world is flooded with solar panels. You know, these guys, the idea that these guys at Albo is essentially going to run a venture capital fund for manufacturing is absolutely hilarious.
It's ludicrous.
It is hilarious. And as Rowan said, you're not dealing with some genius business minds who've got a proven track record of success. You've got a bunch of unionists, lifetime politicians who were staffers. Yeah. Labor's socialist left faction is running the show, and they're going to be picking what's going to work in private enterprise?
Well, the reality, Rita and James, is the Australian public are wising up. I mean, let's not forget, they only got 32.6% of the vote to begin with, so they were never wildly popular. But already, James, according to a poll, a quarter of those who voted for Labor at the last election are going, not making that mistake again. Don't say we didn't warn you, by the way, folks. But anyway, that's a different story. So, so this poll, James?
Well, look, it just continues to show that this is a first-term government that's in real third-term territory here. You know, there seems to be no energy, no imagination. There's a whole bunch of problems that have already accreted onto them, and they don't have any sort of will to do anything about them. So this sort of slow and steady, cautious thing that Albanese came in with, remember that, which was code for I actually don't have any ideas besides the voice.
I don't know what I'm doing.
You know, so now they're just going back to the old drawing board, pulling every sort of old idea out from the drawers about, oh, well, let's subsidise manufacturing. Yeah, that'll work.
They all want to be legacy politicians. Albo had the voice. He was going to change the constitution, insert race into it. Chalmers, again, seems to be one who wants to have big ticket items that are going to be credited to him in the years to come. And it may be, but it may not be in the way you want. So just be careful what you wish for. But this seems to be part of the problem, this grandiose vision they have of themselves. Remember that essay Jim Chalmers wrote about reimagining capitalism?
Well, they're certainly doing that.
Alarm bells ringing everywhere.
Well, the thing is, too, is that a lot of this, too, comes from this desire by the left here and Labour and Chalmers and Albanese to rewrite the fundamental laws of economics. So they found a bunch of academic economists, who are in universities and writing papers and books to suggest that there's actually a new way to do capitalism, a new way for money to work, and actually, this has been tried over and over and over again. It never works.
Exactly. But the great and the best of all is President Javier Milei in Argentina is having massive success with the economy there. That was going down the toilet after decades of doing what we're doing in Australia now. Javier Milei has come out. He said, no, back to basic free market principles. That's what he's doing. He's tearing out all the social, and it is working. He's having proven success, and he's also, which is brilliant, turning against the whole BRICS, Chinese, kind of Brazilian, so-called alternative version to the Western capitalist system. So
I mean, the results he's achieved in a relatively short period of time. He only, I think, took office in December, so we're talking a very short period of time. But we're talking about a country that is economically ruined after decades of this socialism, Peronism, and he has had an impact on the inflation rate there, which is sky high. He's had massive austerity measures, just cutting government down to what is required, not all these... did you remember that graph he had where he just went through and just demolished department after department that was not needed? So it's early days yet, but so far the results are astonishing. And remember, when he was elected, the media meltdown in the West, Argentina's Trump is going to destroy the country, was already destroyed, he's saving the country. But the hyperbole and scaremongering we had, same as when Meloni was elected in Italy, every time there's actually a populist uprising, the media seems to be terrified of people democratically electing someone who wants to try
Meanwhile,
a different way.
the media's hero, Greta Thunberg, has disgraced herself and the entire climate change cult. She has got the kefir out there. She's pro-Palestine. She's anti-Israel. She's clearly hates Jews. She's out there at the Eurovision Song Contest. Have a quick look. But this is who you are supporting. Don't forget, all the school kids were told she's our hero, the great climate change visionary leader who's going to show the world how to go forward. This is who this person is. Have a close look, because if you're still enthralled to the climate change cult, this is who you're dealing with.
Here to show that we think it is outrageous and inexcusable for Eurovision to let Israel participate while committing a genocide. When a country behaves in a way that is unacceptable, then Eurovision excludes them. So why not Israel?
Great work there. Fantastic.
I just love how this girl has gone from being a climate change expert with this deep understanding of science to a Middle East expert without ever going to school. Because remember, she's pretty much missed most of her schooling.
That's how they prefer it. The left prefer it if you are not educated. We're going to take a short break and we'll be back. We've got Rita's Reality Check. We've got Matt Canavan. We've got lots coming up on Outsiders. Happy Mother's Day as well. In a tick.
Welcome back to Outsiders with your hosts, Rowan, Dean, James Morrow, and I'm Rita Panahi from The Rita Panahi Show, Monday to Thursdays at 11.
What?
The Rita Panahi Show. Never forget.
Excellent. When's it on?
Monday to Thursdays at 11. And we should never forget, never, lefties losing it every Friday at 9:30 p.m. And talking about lefties losing it, let's check in with Green Senator and also their resources spokeswoman, Dorinda Cox. This week, she was defending the use of the anti-Semitic chant from the river to the sea and vowing to continue to use it at anti-Israeli rallies.
I did notice one of the banners at this protest said "from the river to the sea." This is a phrase that's getting a bit of controversy. Is that something you've been supporting or chanting, and why, if so?
Well, I do support and have participated in the chant "from the river to the sea." This is something that I think supporters of Palestine are very clear about. And in fact, this is sufficient in the way that we have this conversation. It's grounded in peace and freedom. We are urging the government to step up their action to condemn Israel about its actions in Gaza. And I think that we will continue to chant from the river to the sea to ensure that freedom and peace are delivered. And I don't have any objection to that.
So after no doubt learning about the violent sentiment, the hateful sentiment behind that phrase, she wants to keep chanting it anyway. And Tom Connell, the interview there, bless him, did try to remind her that perhaps calling for the annihilation of the only Jewish state is not all that peaceful.
I mean, this phrase was actually said by Khaled Mashal, the founder and former leader of Hamas, and this was as part of not wanting Israel to exist. That's not a peaceful phrase at all in that context, is it? Does that give you pause for thought about using it?
Well, look, I'm not an expert on Middle Eastern history.
Senator, you have a bit more standing than most to be cautious about phrasing. As I said, this was used by the founder of Hamas, this phrase. He went on to say that also from the south to the north. I mean, obviously what it means for many Jewish people is a Jewish state wouldn't exist because it would be Palestine from the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea. That's the entire of the area.
Well, I think we're splitting hairs over language, and I think we don't even talk about the genocide and, you know, the International Court of Justice and South Africa bringing that case to the International Court and the impact of genocide in Gaza.
She's not an expert on the Middle East, nor what the word genocide means, obviously, but surely she can categorically condemn terror group Hamas when given the opportunity to do so, surely.
It's used by the founder Hamas. I'm assuming you have no support at all for Hamas and their role in things, and including in those October 7 attacks, and the fact that they don't want a Jewish state to exist. That's pretty clear from Hamas, isn't it?
Well, I think that what's starting to be used is a smokescreen in that, and the continuation of that now in relation to our role, the Australian government's role, in relation to its condemning and the sanctions of Netanyahu and his war cabinet needs to be the next action.
That didn't sound like a categorical condemnation of Hamas. Let's give her one more chance. Here she is again, given an opportunity to condemn Hamas, or at least acknowledge that Hamas are murderous, sadistic terrorists.
I mean, let me just put this to you before we go to clarify this. I mean, there's nothing peace-seeking about Hamas, is there?
Well, look, again, I would say my participation in all of those rallies has been about a non-violent approach, a peaceful approach to ending the war in Gaza. And I want to be very clear.
And that's your one, but
that is my intention. Absolutely.
Do you think Hamas
and I have spoken to many.
Resolution?
I have spoken to many protesters in this country.
Oh dear, it speaks volumes about the warped moral compass of the Greens that Senator Cox would defend the use of that contemptible chant even after Prime Minister Anthony Albanese belatedly condemned it as one that promotes violence and has no place in Australia. But too many within Labor have shown themselves to be indifferent to the plight of the Jewish community, both here and in Israel. As for the Greens, the Jewish community must know one thing by now: the modern left are not their friends. Many within the Jewish community have been enthusiastic allies of so-called progressive activists, but that support is not mutual, and it was never going to be. Certainly not among the anti-West advocates who see every issue through the oppressor-oppressed lens. The Greens in particular have shown an appetite for rabid anti-Zionism that is ugly, intolerant, but sadly entirely in keeping with the neo-Marxist worldview of the left. And now to a stunning judgment in the county court in Victoria, one the Victorian government and Victorian police hierarchy would rather you not know about. Judge Liz Gaynor has ruled police were the aggressors and employed unjustified violence during an anti-lockdown protest in May 2021. As reported in the Herald Sun, that judgment has called into question police tactics and prompted calls for prosecutors to consider laying charges against the police involved. In her stinging judgment, Judge Gaynor ruled the arrests on that day were unlawful, saying those arrested did nothing to warrant the violent police response, which was captured by body-worn cameras. She called the response from the police immediate and violent and noted footage of the group in the half hour leading to the arrests showed no behaviour which warranted police forming a view that the crowd was going to engage in violent behaviour. She said, "I'm satisfied that the police were the aggressors in the situation and that they employed unjustified violence." And now let's take a stroll down memory lane and look at life in Victoria in the COVID era. And as you watch this, remember that the vast majority of the media and the gutless Victorian Liberal opposition were completely on board with all of this.
What's this?
An ultrasound in an hour.
Yeah, she's pregnant.
You're head. You're what the are you doing? What the are you doing?
Media! Media! Media!
They're throwing stuff now, and okay, they're shooting. They're now shooting.
It's been 18 months! Enough is enough! Choking me, mate! Is this the future you want for us? They turned you into a Nazi overnight. I'm not even struggling.
Fantastic, Rita, and as you know, we have played that footage repeatedly since the COVID era and during the COVID era, and as you will remember, we were pretty much the only people in Australia's mainstream media who were speaking out against all the abuses, from mandates to masks, the lot of it. In fact, one of those politicians who was brave enough as well to speak up at the same time, great friend of the show, was Senator Matt Canavan. So we're going to chat to Matt now as AstraZeneca has decided to withdraw its COVID-19 vaccine following an admission to various side effects. Matt Canavan, how are you, mate? It's great to see you. Looking fantastic part of the world that you always find yourself in, whereas we're down in rainy old Sydney on a wet Mother's Day. There you go. So AstraZeneca returns, is off the shelves now. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, look, happy Mother's Day, and I know my mum is an avid Outsiders watcher, so hi, Mum. And
excellent.
Yes, look, amazing news this week that now years after we were all told, I think the term was, from memory, safe and effective. Remember that? Everything was safe and effective. We had nothing to worry about. Now one of the major vaccines has been pulled from the market. Now AstraZeneca themselves are blaming low demand, but I think most people have woken up to these vaccines, and a number of regulatory authorities around the world have restricted the use of AstraZeneca because of concerns over side effects, including blood clotting. Now 3 years ago, more than 3 years ago, I raised concerns. I called for AstraZeneca to be suspended in March 2021 when the initial reports came through of blood clotting events leading to deaths in some cases. At the time, I was pilloried by the media, by my colleagues. I was told I was irresponsible, I was going against the science, every name under the sun. And there are very few of those people, in fact, none that I've seen, who have this week come out and said, "Oh, look, sorry, Matt, we were wrong. You got it right." There's no apologies here. And I'd accept an apology. That's all we need. We all make mistakes. But the lesson here about the last few years, the important lesson for us right now, is that a healthy society should never seek to silence dissenting opinions. And we're seeing that again right now, while we have an e-safety commissioner, out-of-control e-safety commissioner, seeking to silence criticism of the child-abusing transgender movement, seeking to silence discussion following a terrorist attack, or what the police have described as a terrorist attack in Western Sydney on the Bishop there. We haven't seemed to have learnt our lesson. We must allow free and open debate, or we'll keep making the massive mistakes we did during COVID.
Absolutely, alleged terrorist attack there in Western Sydney. Matt, you were on Outsiders with Craig Kelly, myself, Rita and James, calling for AstraZeneca to be removed. I remember it very well. And Rita and I were equally defamed and demonised in the Australian Senate. Rita and I are waiting today for our apology as well, aren't we, Rita?
Well, yes, I am waiting. I'm not expecting it anytime soon.
No doubt they'll be on the phone to us.
To drag us to a Senate hearing.
They wanted to go all over us because of things we'd said. Matt.
Well, why don't you come back? I'll put the call in now. I'll put the call in. You come in. I'll invite you.
Fantastic.
And see if the other senators want you to come along now.
Exactly.
I think your invite might be withdrawn now.
Exactly.
Can we speak with parliamentary privilege in a Senate hearing?
I'd love to. I would love to. Maybe you can organise that for us. Maybe you can organise that for us as well, Matt.
If that's on the table, I am on board 100%. Now, one of the things I'm concerned about is the legal rights of people who perhaps have vaccine injuries or fear that they've had adverse reaction. What exactly is the recourse they have? Because these vaccines were introduced with these companies almost having protection against legal action. So is that going to change? Is there going to be any sort of inquiry into rethinking those initial decisions?
Well, a colleague of mine, Senator Ralph Babet from Victoria, has introduced a bill to remove immunity going forward for drug companies, or I should say, what Ralph does is seek to remove the power of the health minister to provide such immunity. And I completely agree with that bill, support that bill. In terms of what's gone past, there were immunities agreed to, legal immunities agreed to. The vaccines didn't seem to give you or I much immunity, but the health minister gave the drug companies legal immunity. See what I did there? Legal immunity. Right, so they got legal immunity from prosecution or for a claim. Now, what we don't know, the scandal here is, despite questions that I and others have asked in the Senate, we don't know exactly what the terms of that legal immunity are. Now, my view is that even if they are given a certain amount of legal immunity, I've asked about, well, what if they misled or deceived people? What if Pfizer knowingly, or one of these companies, or any of these companies, knowingly said things that they knew were untrue? Are they immune then? And I can't get an answer because they rest back on this absurd commercial in confidence situation. So that's what I really want to know. I mean, obviously they were provided immunity at a time of uncertainty. The rollout was happening fast. But if they lied to people, if that can be proven, like a big tobacco company has, say, for example, in the past, surely a government should not give them any kind of legal immunity from legitimate prosecution from those who have been injured by these vaccines. And keep in mind, all drugs have side effects. All of them do. And that was the most absurd thing over these last few years. We were hoodwinked, or some people were hoodwinked into believing that these vaccines, apparently the first drugs ever in the world invented, had no side effects and could not at all lead to anyone having the most critical responses.
James.
Indeed. And I want to just talk also, before we let you go, Matt, about what else we've got coming up this week, which is the budget on Tuesday. And it's funny you mentioned, the e-safety commissioner trying to control what we think and everything. Well, we've also got this Future Made in Australia idea coming out. We're going to have more details on that Tuesday night, which is going to try and control how the market works in this country and direct capital from what the market thinks are good investments to what Jim Chalmers and a bunch of Treasury bureaucrats and presumably a bunch of Labor people think are good investments. Now, this just seems like protectionism by another name. Danielle Wood, the head of the Productivity Commission, has slammed this. Where do you come down on this whole idea that the government should be telling us where money should be invested?
Well, I think this is the absolutely wrong approach. I mean, you couldn't get perhaps a worse group of individuals to spend your money in these ways than a bunch of politicians in Canberra. I'm actually all for the government seeking to promote Australian manufacturing. I'm all for us taking action against the illegal subsidies that China continues to provide its own manufacturers. But this is not the way to go about it. They're not the way to go about it to have a bunch of politicians in like a Utopia episode, and that's how it works. They're very good, actually, that Utopia series. They're sitting around going, yeah, we should invest in this company because I know Jim and I know Bob and they're good people, let's invest in them. That's the wrong way to do it. A better way to do it would be to put tariffs on this Chinese steel and other products that are coming into our country that are subsidised. We can do that under the WTO. Let's do that and protect our jobs there. A better way to do it would be lower taxes and lower red tape.
Here,
on the
here.
manufacturing industry.
Get rid of the red
and then
green
the final
tape.
thing, maybe I'm just being a bit crazy here. Maybe we should try and get our energy prices down. That will probably help all Australian manufacturers as well if we invest again in coal and gas and look to nuclear long term as well and drop this mad obsession with renewable energy. That's what's driving our manufacturing businesses offshore right now. They're going to the US because the US produced more oil than any country in any year ever last year, under the Biden administration. And oil and gas prices as a consequence are as low as they've ever been in the US. And our manufacturers like Intertech Pivot, like Orica, are going off our shores over there while we stay obsessed with trying to change the temperature of the globe.
Even Mars bars reckon they're heading overseas, possibly. Rita, quickly.
Matt, you mentioned that alleged terror incident in a Sydney church. In the past week, we had another incident, but the police authorities are reluctant to categorise it as a terror incident, despite the assailant posting very clear motivations for the attack he was about to commit. I mean, when is a terror incident not a terror incident?
Well, I don't think we're going to successfully combat this new era of Islamicist terrorism unless we can actually call it for what it is. And I noticed the WA Premier has said that the attack has all the hallmarks of a terror incident. The New South Wales Police, as I said earlier, used similar language around the attack on the bishop. But there seems to be this institutional resistance from describing what's going on. And of course, there's pressure from Muslim groups now to even drop the term religiously motivated, not even just Islamism. And the facts on the ground, Rita, are there aren't too many Methodists martyring themselves right now. And I'm against all types of religiously motivated extremism. If there are other religious groups engaging this, of course we should crack down on that. There have been some far right-wing groups that have gone silly and done stupid things recently. They should be cracked down on. But so should we need to be able to call this for what it is, which is a perverted, an extreme and radical form of Islam that is unfortunately being propagated by some senior clerics to vulnerable young Australians. We have to talk about that if we're going to defeat it. If we can't even talk about it, forget about it. It will keep happening and we won't be as safe and as secure as we should be in this great country.
Absolutely. Matt Canavan, always fantastic to chat to you. On this happy Mother's Day to Mrs. Canavan as well, Matt's mother, she's fantastic, and all the mums out there in Australia. Thanks so much, Matt.
My wife too, yeah.
And your wife, absolutely.
Get the mums.
Absolutely, mate. Okay, take care. Coming up, we've got David Bell talking about the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty. Can't wait. In a tip. Well, negotiations between United Nations member nations for the World Health Organization's Pandemic Preparedness Treaty have resumed this week after reports of countries struggling to agree on a draft proposal. I wonder why that might be. Joining us now with the latest is Dr. David Bell, formerly a World Health Organization medical officer who's here in Australia, speaking and warning, David, about this pandemic treaty. Welcome to Outsiders, David. Thanks for coming along. Tell us in a nutshell why Australians should be worried about I know there are two aspects to it, but basically the World Health Organization Pandemic Treaty preparations.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Well, you saw those clips you showed from Melbourne from a couple of years ago, and it's worth remembering that was a virus that kills people on average at the age of 80 or greater, and people who are already sick. But that was the reaction to it. These treaties, they basically hand decision-making for what is a pandemic emergency and what the response should be to the World Health Organization from national governments. And the decision-making, we saw they've already, that they declared an emergency for monkeypox, which was, they did that when there was 5 people dead in the whole world. So it was a pretty low threshold. And so it's based on a fallacy that we have increasing risk of pandemics, increasing number of outbreaks. There's a report out from the University of Leeds recently that shows that this is actually using the data that the WHO, G20, the World Bank use, that it's the opposite, that actually for the last 10 to 20 years, we have a reducing risk for all sorts of reasons, and we can just detect pathogens better. So the treaty is, or the two instruments, they're putting together a system where about $30 to $40 billion of public money, which is about 10 times what you spend on the WHO now, will build this huge surveillance system that will find viral variants. They'll have lockdowns, they'll have a 100-day mRNA vaccine. You just discussed a similar vaccine and the problems with that. And that will be the path back to freedom. And the profits from this will go to farmers. So it's really a huge business scheme on an international level we haven't seen before, to channel public funds into pharmaceutical companies and investment houses that own them, and in the process impoverish the population and take away the basic freedoms we thought were ours.
James.
David, I just want to ask you about the WHO. We saw their performance during the COVID pandemic, and we saw the way Tedros and other officials basically slow-walked any investigation of China and the origins of that. And now we have people talking about H5N1 and a bird flu virus and things like that. Why on earth would anybody trust the WHO?
Because they still think it's the sort of organisation it was maybe 70, 80 years ago, where the countries gave it money and based on what are the worst diseases, where you can make the most difference, and what countries ask for, it would respond and do something useful. And that's all changed. Now about 80% of its funding is specified, which means the funder just tells the organisation what to do. So it's not an independent organisation, it's a tool of the funders. And about 25% of that funding is private. That's either pharmaceutical corporations or big investors in pharmaceutical corporations. So it's become a tool of these corporations. It's they use it as a public-private partnership to improve the returns on their investment. It's not, and that's why they would do it, because this is about, in the end, it's about making a lot of money.
Rita.
Well, we saw the world follow China's example and employ lockdowns, abandon their pandemic plans that they had in place and just follow China. How much influence does China exert over the World Health Organization?
Well, it exerts a lot, and in a way it should, because it's 1.3 billion people, and the WHO should represent, the people of the world. But in saying that, it obviously shouldn't be able to tell the people of the world what to do or to have much influence at all on what they do. So China has a lot of influence. They give very little money. In the last 2 years, they gave less than Nigeria or, I think, a couple of times. Yeah. So, but they have a huge influence politically on who gets the top job, the Director General. So, through diplomatic means, it's a vote by countries. You influence low-income countries, etc., on how they vote, and in return they'll get some deals from China. So that's what all countries do.
So very quickly, David, before we go, what would be your advice, or speaking directly to the Australian government, what would you be saying?
Well, at a minimum, put off this vote. They're still negotiating these. They're supposed to be legally binding documents, and 2 weeks out from the vote, they're still negotiating. There's really no idea what the finance behind it is, etc. They haven't decided what they're going to do with these documents. But I mean, it's based on a fallacy. Essentially, they should vote no, but at a very minimum, they should put this off and have a better think about it before we go forward.
David Bell, thanks so much for talking to us on Outsiders and warning us there about the World Health Organization. You got that? Government, vote no. Liberal Party, let's hear from you. Vote no. How often have we been saying this for years? Let's get the Liberal Party strongly opposed to this. I know Peter Dutton is. Let's get them absolutely opposed to pushing forward with this World Health Organization madness. Now let's grab a little bit of Netzany. If you're going to go on a boat, it may as well be a very big one, Rita. Mark Zuckerberg, who cares about the climate.
Well, like most of these catastrophist climate change activists who want everyone else to change their lifestyles, it doesn't apply to him. He's got the private jet. Now he's got a $300 million mega yacht, not even a super yacht. This is a mega yacht. There it is in, I think that's in Florida, Fort Lauderdale, wow, that is, I think you can land a helicopter on that. It looks bloody massive.
Clearly concerned about his carbon footprint. But while he's out there sailing the seas, he might well run into all these disastrous solar panels which are floating around the place. You see, this is an Indian solar farm, the biggest in the world, or the floating solar farm, or something like that.
What could have gone wrong?
What went wrong? A storm. Guess you do get
happens.
Storms at sea from
In
time
the
to
Indian
time.
Ocean,
Who'd
a
have
storm,
thought?
really?
Who'd have
Oh my
picked it?
gosh,
There you
wow.
Go. There you go.
I am so upset that you've shown that footage because there's every chance that Chris Bowen's going to see it and it's going to be a new idea.
Oh, yeah.
I can just see our shoreline covered.
Straight off Bondi Beach, Chris, there you go. Give it to the Vaucluse. The Teals electorate, the Manly electorate, the Northern Beaches electorate, they're all Teals electorates. Let's get those windmills floating around off Palm Beach and Whale Beach and see how much of the voters like that. The Magna Carta, the greatest expression of our freedoms and the freedom of the individual, a man and woman against the tyranny and oppression of those above us. Rita, James, the Magna Carta has been coming under attack from the usual suspects. Just Stop Oil, James.
Well, yeah, and I think we've got some vision of them attacking this. Let's have a look here. We don't have that. Okay. Anyway, so again, this is these Just Stop Oil people having a go. Have a look.
This famous document is about the rule of law.
Yes, can you come to...
And standing up against an abusive power.
Look at this nonsense. I mean, number one, people like this are allowed to keep attacking these things and have it be filmed. So shame on everybody who's filming these things and not stopping them.
Where are the guards?
Number two, where are the guards? Number three, there needs to be, we talk about hate crimes for crimes against, race and gender and sexuality. Let's have a hate crime for those who attack the symbols of the West.
Absolutely.
Those elderly ladies need to be in jail. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Jail.
Jail.
Let's take a
Handcuffs.
quick break. We'll be back shortly. Lots more to talk about here on Outsiders. Hello, you're watching Outsiders with Rita Panahi, with James Morrow, and with myself, Rowan Dean. Well, this weekend, I accuse the federal Labor government of Australia and all their supporters of betraying every single Jewish woman, girl, baby, man or boy in this country. I accuse the federal Labor government of Australia and all their supporters of giving encouragement and moral support to gang rapists, mass murderers, torturers, sexual deviants and pedophiles. I accuse the federal Labor government of Australia and their supporters of giving encouragement and moral support to the legions of anti-Semites and Jew haters currently parading throughout the universities of our nation and on the streets of our cities. And I accuse the federal Labor government of Australia and their supporters of the most disgusting and egregious failure of moral character and human decency. Our federal Labor government is a national disgrace and has shamed us once more on the world stage. I implore anybody who has ever been prepared to give this federal Labor government or their supporters like the Teals and the Greens the benefit of the doubt to now recognise that this is a government fuelled by hatred of Israel and rife with a total disdain for the safety, security, hopes and dreams of Jews in this country and across the world. On Friday, at the behest of Labor's Foreign Minister Penny Wong, Australia voted yes to a motion to give favourable consideration to Palestine becoming a member of the United Nations. In doing so, Australia publicly aligned itself with the enemies of Israel against the friends of Israel. Penny Wong is a disgrace. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and I applaud him for doing this, has dubbed the controversial UN vote as, quote, the most hostile policy act of an Australian government to the State of Israel in our history, end of quote. Scott Morrison says that this is what the terrorists wanted and that this is why Hamas attacked Israel. Tony Abbott agrees with him, describing the vote, Penny Wong's vote, as, quote, rewarding the October 7 atrocities. And I wholeheartedly agree and applaud them both for those comments. The Australian Jewish Association is rightly appalled, putting out a statement last night saying, and I quote, Labor lied to us. They promised there would be no difference in Israel-related policies, meaning from the coalition. This vote, says the Australian Jewish Organisation, will embolden terrorism, violence and fuel even more anti-Semitism locally and potentially more widely. The Australian government has in effect served a victory to Hamas, says the Australian Jewish Association. All decent Australians should condemn aligning our country with such evil, end of quote. Sadly, I have to say, I am horrified but not surprised by this disgusting betrayal by Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese. They could have voted against the proposal, as did the United States, as did Argentina, under the brilliant and inspiring leadership of President Javier Milei, as did even Papua New Guinea, our nearest neighbour, all of whom voted against the motion. We could have abstained from the resolution, as did Canada, as did Britain, as did many European nations. But no, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese decided to position Australia to stand shoulder to shoulder with anti-Semitic, Jew-hating nations like Iran, Yemen, Tajikistan, Russia, Oman, El Salvador, North Korea, and China. Great work, Penny Wong. You can judge a country by the company it keeps. And you, Penny Wong, have thrown us in with the worst of the worst. Foreign Minister Wong, of course, was running around ABC studios yesterday claiming that the vote does not reward Hamas. Really? But as I said, I'm horrified but not surprised. Virtually every single relevant Middle East action Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese have taken since they miserably clawed their way into government with a paltry 32% of the primary vote has been hostile to Israel. You do not treat your friends the way these undergraduate neo-Marxists have treated the people of Israel and the Jews of Australia. At every turn, and whenever the opportunity has arisen, Penny Wong has spat in the face of the Jews of Australia. Jews have been in Australia since the First Fleet. Australia's Jews have been at the forefront of this nation's political, scientific, military and academic achievements for over 2 centuries. Yet Penny Wong has seen fit to trample all over Australia's Jews. And the Greens and the Teals are no better. At the urging of the Teals, including Allegra Spender, Zoe Daniels, Kate Cheney, and the rest of them, Penny Wong resumed for a second time funding UNRWA, the United Nations agency with proven links to Hamas. Penny Wong was praised by Hamas, literally praised on Twitter by the terrorists' news network themselves, when she changed Australia's diplomatic language by abandoning the term disputed territories, which is used to describe parts of Judea and Samaria which are disputed, and instead, thanks to Penny Wong, calling them occupied territories. In other words, demonising Israel and rewarding terrorism. No doubt, Hamas will again be popping the bubbly, rejoicing at Wong's latest pro-Palestinian gesture. Here is the Israeli ambassador to the UN condemning the actions of those nations, voting for the resolution, including, shamefully, Australia.
Not a single Palestinian leader, not even one, has condemned the October 7th massacre. He calls the Hamas his brothers. And this is who you want to bestow the rights of a state upon? A terror entity? As long as so many of you are Jew-hating, you don't really care that the Palestinians are not peace-loving. Despite your obligation to the UN Charter, you are here today to expose what the Charter truly means to you. When it comes to the lives of Israelis and Jews, the UN Charter means nothing to you. Nada, kaput.
Penny Wong also claims that voting yes will increase the likelihood of a two-state solution. She even goes so far as to say Palestine can be a state without a peace process being complete. She is either ignorant beyond belief or deliberately deceiving the Australian public. Here's a tiny part of a brief history lesson about Israel from Ben Shapiro.
So in 1993, they signed the Oslo Accords, and that is where you get Bill Clinton presiding over one of the least successful international negotiations in the history of international politics. The Oslo Accords have been a complete and utter failure, shaking hands with a mass-murdering terrorist, Yasser Arafat, and this was going to initiate a new period of health and accord, and there was going to be peace. All that the PLO had to do was acknowledge that Israel existed and had a right to exist, stop educating their children in terrorism, and cease the violence. They couldn't do any of those things, right? So none of that happened. Instead, there's an uptick in violence, pretty dramatic uptick in violence after the Oslo Accords. In 1998, Israel again attempts to make some sort of concessions to the Palestinians, this time under the first tenure of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Israel does not want to govern these areas. Israel is not interested in governing millions of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip or in Judea and Samaria. In 2000, Israel engages in the Camp David negotiations. Bill Clinton is still president at this point, and the prime minister of Israel is now a guy named Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak offered everything. Ehud Barak offered complete control over the Temple Mount with just like a little bit of a recognition that Israel has a historic claim religiously to the Temple Mount. Arafat turned it down flat. He offered control over virtually all of Judea and Samaria. He offered control over the Gaza Strip, right? A Palestinian state, boom, done. Arafat does not even negotiate. He just launches a massive round of violence. I remember this because I was actually in Israel right about the time they launched the Intifada, and there were suicide bombings on a fairly regular basis. They blew up a Sparrow's Pizza shop. I was supposed to be at that corner like a couple of hours later. This was a thing that was really scary. It was really violent. Remember, he launched that not after Israel did something aggressive. He launched that after Israel offered him everything he could possibly want if he weren't a damned liar who just wanted Israel wiped off the map. This, again, is the great lie, is that there is desire for a two-state solution from the Palestinian side. So far, there has been no evidence whatsoever that this is the case.
On every occasion the Palestinians have been offered a state alongside Israel, they have turned it down. In 2014, I visited Israel with a group of Australian journalists, about 10 of us. We were there for a week, which included a trip into Ramallah on the West Bank to meet official Palestinian representatives. After a lengthy and frankly incredible, hard to believe presentation, we got to ask questions. I asked this official spokesperson for the Palestinian authorities to describe what the two-state solution he was so eagerly promoting would actually look like. First, I asked him what the two states would actually be called. He said the first state would be called Palestine, of course. And how many Jews would be allowed to live in Palestine, I asked. He did not hesitate. None. He said, not one, I asked. No, not one, he reiterated. I then asked him what the other state would be called. He shrugged dismissively and said he did not care, call it whatever you want. And then I asked him how many Jews would be allowed to live in that state. There was an awkward silence. He muttered something to one of his colleagues, they conferred for a little bit, and then he said, just a handful. His words, in front of a group of Australian journalists from the ABC, various newspapers and Sky. I was the only person in that room who reported those words, an official Palestinian spokesperson admitting to Western journalists that only a handful of Jews would be left in the second of those two states. That's what from the river to the sea means. Israel is a vibrant, energising, extraordinary multicultural and multiracial democracy. Not unlike Australia, the people of Israel are only interested in one thing. No, it's not world domination. No, it's not colonising the Palestinians. No, it's not apartheid. No, it's none of that undergraduate rubbish. Israel and the Jews are interested in one thing only, and that is surviving as a state and living in peace with their neighbours. That's it. And do you want to know why that is? Well, here's why.
The Jewish population in Morocco was about 265,000 in 1948, while today it's only about 2,000. Let's continue. In Algeria, in 1948, about 140,000 Jews lived. Today, only about 50. In Tunisia, in 1948, about 150,000 Jews lived. Today, only about 50. In Libya, in 1948, about 38,000 Jews lived. Today, there is not even one. In Egypt, in 1948, about 75,000 Jews lived. Today, only about 40. In Yemen, in 1948, about 55,000 Jews lived. Today, only about 50. About 150,000 Jews lived in Iraq in 1948. Today, only 7. In Syria, in 1948, about 40,000 Jews lived. Today, not even one Jew. About 20,000 Jews lived in Lebanon in 1948. Today, only about 100. And now, get the following figure. How many Arabs lived in Israel in 1948? About 156,000. And how many Arabs live there today? 2,178,000.
On October 7th, Hamas set about openly attempting the genocide of the Jewish people. 1,200 people were slain in the most horrific, grisly, degrading, and evil fashions, with hundreds taken hostage. The leaders of Hamas have promised to repeat that vile pogrom again and again and again, if given the chance, and they mean it.
إسرائيل دولة لا مقام لها على أرضنا. إحنا الدولة لابد أن نزيلها.
This grub went on to say that October 7th would happen again and again until Israel no longer exists, because he claimed its very existence, the very existence of Israel, he says, is illogical and the nation must be wiped away. You can't get any clearer than that. You can't get more despicable than that. And you cannot get more grotesque than that.
لا بتكلم عنه كل الأراضي الفلسطينية.
كل الأراضي الفلسطينية يعني زوال إسرائيل؟
طبعا. وجود إسرائيل غير منطقي. وجود إسرائيل هو اللي بخلق كل هذه الآلام والعذابات والدموع والدماء. هي إسرائيل مش إحنا. إحنا ضحية الاحتلال. نقطة وآخر السطر.
And here are the Hamas thugs worth a reputed $11 billion, all of it donated by the West, living the high life in Qatar, jet-setting around the Middle East, while hostages, Jewish hostages, live and die in horror in the tunnels beneath Gaza. These are the people whose interests Penny Wong has now aligned Australia with. It is an absolute disgrace. Allow me to say to every Jew here in Australia and around the world, we do not support the Australian government's vote. We do not support the Australian government's cowardice, and we do not support the Australian government's brazen deceptions and stupidity. Labor has betrayed you, and Labor has betrayed all of us. I say to the Jews of the world, we will do our darndest to rid ourselves of this appalling and internationally embarrassing Labor, Greens, Teal government at the next election, and we will vote in a coalition government who, like the vast majority of Australians, do not, I repeat, do not despise the Jews. We, the vast majority of Australians, stand firmly on the side of Israel and our Jewish friends, brothers and sisters. Joining us now is Victor Davis Hanson from the Hoover Institute, senior fellow and author, and he's got a great new book out, well, called, wait for it, The End of Everything. Can't get more definitive than that. The End of Everything, How Wars Descend into Annihilation, which was released last Tuesday. Victor, fantastic to have you here back on Outsiders.
Thank you.
We've been talking about, obviously, your book is very timely, and its warning of how civilizations do collapse and do get annihilated. And you go through several historical civilizations that ceased to exist, that were wiped out. So tell us a bit about the book, and then we'll talk about how it relates to the modern era. But tell us first about your book.
Well, wars usually end in some kind of negotiation, and the defeated accept terms. Sometimes an Attila the Hun or Genghis Khan will come through and kill a lot of people, of course. Final solution, Hitler. But even Japan and Germany survived World War II. But every once in a while, an entire civilization is wiped out by war. And I looked at 4 examples. There's more. The ancient city of Thebes in classical Greece that was wiped out to the foundations by Alexander the Great. Carthage in the Third Punic War, after a 3-year siege, Scipio Aemilianus leveled it to the ground. Constantinople, the entire Christian, Byzantine, Greek-speaking population ceased to exist as an entity 30 years after the fall of Constantinople, which became kind of the DNA was changed, and minarets were slapped on Hagia Sophia and became the capital of the Ottoman Empire. And then I looked finally at Hernan Cortez's destruction of the Aztec Empire, and he leveled Tenochtitlan, the capital, down to the foundation and used the rubble to build Mexico City. And then within 50 years, there was no idea of Aztec language civilization. And then very quickly, I came up with, I found there were common denominators. All of these societies didn't recognize they were in decline. They had all sorts of problems with their militaries. They had no idea of the intent or the capability of their enemies. They were living on delusions of lost grandeur. They kept thinking even if they did resist the Romans or the Macedonians or the Muslims and they lost, there would be negotiations as there had been in that past. They bragged their walls had never been breached in Constantinople or Carthage. And finally, so there was a lot of naivete, a lot of living in fantasies, a lot of utopianism about the nature of the people outside the walls. And then in an epilogue, I kind of surveyed the contemporary landscape of what Mr. Erdogan has said to Greeks and Armenians, what Mr. Chai has said in China to Taiwan, of course, the Putin and the Russians to Ukraine, and especially what a series of Iranian leaders have said to Israel, and all of them are existential threats from, you're going to wake up one morning and Athens is going to be blanketed with rockets. So Israel's a one-bomb state where half the world's Jews make it convenient, such thing. And the denial, contemporary people think, Kim Jong-un is a nut, he would never launch what he says he will. But in history, this happens on occasion. I think we should be aware of how it does, why it does, and why we should take it seriously.
James.
Well, Professor, the big theme of your book seems to be denial about that decline, about whether your allies will come to get you and, the nature of your enemy. Is the West, our nations, like the United States, in a similar sort of denial? And in a place like Australia, I'm thinking about the Venetians not coming to aid in Constantinople. Are we in a real sort of similar sort of historical parallel right now today?
I think more than half our country is worried about just what you outlined. We're $35 trillion in debt. We're borrowing $1 trillion every 100 days. We are short 45,000 recruits, mostly white males of the lower classes that this administration has libeled, even though they died at twice their demographics in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have 10 million people who cross the border. We have no idea who they are. There is no border. And our defense budget is short. Artillery shells, javelins, were outbuilt by the Chinese 5-1. And yet we say that all of our friends in the area where you live, Australia, Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea, are part of the Western protectorate, and we have responsibilities, but I don't think we could fulfill them with our present capability, or to be frank, this administration, I don't feel that we have any deterrence after Afghanistan or the Chinese balloon fiasco or the Ukrainian Gazan wars. We have too many opportunistic enemies that feel that we won't or cannot do anything.
Rita.
Well, if we are in this civilizational decline, who's the biggest threat? Is it China, or is it the rise of Islamism? What is the factor we need to be most aware of?
Well, we have two threats in the West. One, of course, is an external enemy that has a population of 1.4 billion. It's a communist dictatorship, and it violates all international rules. It's taken over the South China Sea, and it feels that in the long term, it's destined to defeat the West, that we're affluent, we're decadent, our fertility is bad as well, but we're in decline, and it's opportunistic. And then we have what I would call a more insidious enemy of radical Islam. And we have in the United States 250,000 students, and most of these campuses, for example, where the virulent anti-Semitism takes place is spearheaded by people either from the Middle East on campus or on work visas that are not even students. And they're the people who are yelling, go back to Poland, roughing up Jews on campus, terrorizing other students, and using useful idiot American students as their pawns. So there's two threats, and kind of an internal and I think immigration is a big problem in the West. We haven't solved that. No Western countries solved that. They just are incapable of saying, we'd like to assimilate you, we'd like to integrate you, we'll intermarry you. All you have to do is come legally with a background audit in diverse numbers and numbers that we can assimilate. But you're not just going to flood into our country and then create a tribal enclave. And yet we can't say that to them.
So, Victor, you're right in suggesting probably that there ain't a copy of your book making its way to the White House, but do you think there's a copy on a bedside down in Mar-a-Lago somewhere that might be being flicked through? And do you see hope that Trump would, if he wins the next election, would be able to reverse some of this decline?
Well, he did before. He got, for all the crudity that he was accused of, and he can be crude, he got the Europeans to spend $100 billion more in defense. He raised our budget by $100 billion. There was no North Korean missiles launched. Their ISIS was destroyed. He killed Mr. Soleimani. The Houthis were declared terrorists. Hamas and Hezbollah were quiescent. We had a closed border by 2020. He stopped that. And so, I mean, there wasn't perfect, but he redid a lot of the things that Obama had done. And the Middle East was quiet. It was so quiet that Jake Sullivan, Mr. Biden's national security advisor, said just before October 7th that his Middle East portfolio was quiet. They inherited a quiet Middle East. He didn't say from whom, but he admitted that it was quiet.
But Trump right now is being prosecuted politically, this criminal case in New York. How do you see that? They're determined to have him criminally convicted, perhaps even sent to jail. What do you see unfolding there?
Well, everybody in the United States knows if he hadn't gone for re-election, there would be no case. Everybody knows these so-called crimes have never been indicted. Nobody's ever been indicted for any of them. No ex-president has had his house raided. No ex-president has been indicted for a phone call. No ex-president has been indicted for real estate assessments, which the bank enjoyed, made a profit, and the loans were paid back in timely fashion. No ex-president has had a campaign violation made into a felony, if it was a violation. Barack Obama had $300,000 in campaign violations. No one suggested that should be criminal rather than a civil offense. So everybody understands, I think the majority of Americans, what this is a effort of lawfare, because what the left cannot achieve at the ballot box. Joe Biden is polling about 38% approval. None of his policies are get 51% approval, and they feel they can tie Donald Trump up all summer long, destroy him financially, psychologically, physically, run up $1 billion in legal fees. And they don't care about the country. We're the laughing stock of the world. We lecture people in Africa and Asia and Latin America about the wonders of American jurisprudence and blind justice and all this crap that we have abandoned. And so I think a lot of us are very embarrassed, and we want the United States to return to a legal society. We're also very afraid because under this administration, the FBI, the CIA, the DOJ have been weaponized in a way that we've never seen. Very hard to accept the left. You know, it's all for equality and equity and peace and love, but they're very hardcore using the federal government to go after their political enemies.
It is strange days indeed. Victor will be rushing out to buy the book, so I urge people, The End of Everything, How Wars Descend into Annihilation, which you've just released. Probably slightly depressing read in parts, but and you're not aware of the problem unless you identify the problem, and well done for doing that. And as I said, let's hope that there's a copy down in Mar-a-Lago. Thanks so much, Victor, and great to chat to you. Coming up, what's more, we've got James's donkey vote in a tick.
Hello, you're watching Outsiders. I'm James Memory Lane Morrow, here as always with Rita Roll the Tape Panahy and Rowan Remember When Dean. And today, we're going to play a little game of compare and contrast. I'm going to play two clips, one of Joe Biden 10 years ago and one from just the other day. First, Joe Biden speaking on the topic of Israel in 2014. Let's go.
It's more than merely a moral obligation we have. It's a security necessity. It's for both Israel's sake and for the United States. The security of Israel and the United States is inextricably tied. And we will never, ever, ever abandon Israel out of our own self-interest.
I mean, you can just see how much the man has declined looking at him 10 years ago and now. Could you imagine the president trying to even pronounce the word inextricably today? But now, let's look again at Joe Biden speaking to CNN just a few days ago on the same topic, Israel.
I made it clear that if they go into Rafah, they haven't gone into Rafah yet. If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. It's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery.
So much vigor there. Now, two things stand out pretty obviously from these two clips. Number one, there's the incredible decline, of course, in Joe Biden's vigor, his mental acuity. The man has aged and been aged incredibly by the office and time. But two, the more important thing, I think, for our purposes is the huge backflip when it comes to Israel. Threatening the government of Israel that the U.S. would withhold aid, and this is key, if they go into Rafah in the Gaza Strip to finish off Hamas. Now, this is, of course, a tremendous gift to Hamas and their masters in Tehran. Donald Trump said as much and more in the past few hours, posting on Truth Social. Crooked Joe Biden, whether he knows it or not, just said he will withhold weapons from Israel as they fight to eradicate Hamas terrorists in Gaza. Hamas murdered thousands of innocent civilians, including babies, and are still holding Americans hostage, if the hostages are still alive. Yet Crooked Joe, Trump says, is taking the side of these terrorists, just like he has sided with the radical mobs taking over our college campuses because his donors are funding them. Biden is weak, corrupt, and leading the world straight into World War III. Remember, this war in Israel, just like the war in Ukraine, he says, would never have started if I was in the White House, Trump said. But very soon we will be back and once again demanding peace through strength. That was Donald Trump just a few hours ago, but there is even, beyond all of this, with this backflip on Israel, a bigger issue that we need to get into, and that is why Biden made this move. And I think the reasons why this move were made are obvious for all to see. Because in doing so as well, he may have landed himself, Joe Biden, in some trouble. Indeed, some analysts are now saying that this could be, and would certainly be more likely if the parties were reversed, an impeachable offense, given that the likely reason Biden withheld the aid was to help not American foreign policy or national security interests, but to assist the Democrats in the unenviable task of shoring up the Muslim vote in key states like Michigan, where U.S. support for Israel has voters furious. Because remember, this is exactly this whole political quid pro quo what Donald Trump was accused of doing when the Democrats tried to impeach him for threatening Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky, telling Zelensky that he might withhold military aid to help in the fight against Putin's invading armies if Zelensky didn't cooperate with an investigation into Hunter Biden's oil and gas business activities in Ukraine. So again, let's dive into the archives. Here's Joe Biden on the Jimmy Kimmel program in September 2019.
The idea that someone would call a head of a foreign state ahead of time, withhold significant military aid that's badly needed in order to prevent the Russian separatists who are in in Ukraine from taking over Ukraine. And then ask basically can you cooperate with Rudy Giuliani's coming over? Talked about getting the Justice Department engaged in this. I mean, it's such a blatant abuse of power that it just I don't think it can stand.
Yeah, well, do you think it is an impeachable, this particular instance is an impeachable offense?
Based on the material that they acknowledge today, it seems to me it's awful hard to avoid the conclusion that it is an impeachable offense and a violation of constitutional responsibility.
Whoa, hang on. What's that you say, Mr. President? Withholding foreign military aid from a democratic ally facing an existential war for your own domestic political purposes is an impeachable offense? Why, I never. And throughout the 2020 campaign, Joe Biden hit this theme again and again, saying time and again that in threatening to withhold aid, Donald Trump was guilty of a, quote, abuse of power, unquote, and that he, quote, thought he was above the law, unquote. Yet, suddenly now, the tune has changed. Biden can withhold aid from an ally he spent his whole career defending for what are clearly, blatantly political reasons, and everything is, it seems, okay. Well, I don't know about you, but I'd love to see this thrashed out in a presidential debate, and I suspect Donald Trump would too, as he threw down this challenge this week.
Come on, Joe, let's do it. Anywhere, anytime, any place.
And I think Joe Biden may have accepted. Did he just accept? Well, gosh, I cannot wait for that. And I know I'm not qualified to give financial advice on this program, but it might be a good idea to go very long on popcorn.
Fantastic, James. Well, Wackademia and the wacky world of academia. Let me just quickly say congratulations to Jennifer Westacott, the Vice-Chancellor of the Western Sydney University, there for actually coming out, one of the only Vice-Chancellors to come out against the anti-Semitism on these campuses. And also congratulations to Greg Craven for a great piece on that topic. But let's talk about Wackademia. Rita, blackface is back on our screens, or is it
kind
blackface?
Well, yeah, two of the teens you'll see here kicked out of their elite school in California for indulging in blackface. Well, they've just been awarded $1 million because they were just actually masks they were wearing to help with your skin tone. So if you've got acne as a teenager, it's recommended you wear these masks, and that's what that was. But overzealous bureaucrats at the school call these boys racists and expel them.
Fantastic. Well, there was another school, there was someone calling for beheading the school president. Why would that have been, James?
Oh, well, because of hostile clashes over ending their Gaza encampment. These encampments have sprung up all over the country, the U.S. George Washington University has had some of the worst ones, by the way. They've been projecting all sorts of images about, basically proving that really what their movement is not about. It's not about, ending the war in Gaza. It is really actually about violent overthrow of the United States. This is what they're teaching in these schools, people.
And we saw that right after October 7, when some of these academics were very bold in stating, well, what did you think decolonisation was going to look like? Did you think it was going to be a fun ride? So they've been very, very explicit in saying what we saw in October 7, that violent, sadistic uprising, is part of how they see they're going to defeat the West. It's not going to be just submission and done peacefully.
Absolutely. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, the Canberra Clown Show. Bit of a trip in the past on this one. In a tick. Roll up, roll up. It's the Canberra Clown Show. And this week we hop in the time machine and travel back to one of the greatest circus acts ever seen on this continent, and it was, of course, the Canberra coronavirus COVID clown show, starring none other than an entire cast of premiers, prime ministers, chief health officers, all posing as COVID clowns. Here are some of the highlights. It's none other than ScoMo himself with one of his classic, funniest one-liners.
That's the sort of country we live in. People make their own decisions about their own health and their own bodies. That's why we don't have mandatory vaccination in relation to the general population here.
And he delivered it with a straight face, and like any good comic, ScoMo knows how to keep telling the same old gag and making it sound fresh each time.
We do not have a mandatory vaccination policy in this country. We do not have that. We are not proposing to have that. That is not changing.
Right, okay. And of course, no COVID performance would be complete without ScoMo's little sidekick here, the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly.
In this situation, I can absolutely say that I remain confident in the AstraZeneca vaccine, that it's safe, and that there is, at this point, no evidence that it causes blood clots. No evidence that it causes blood clots.
One of the biggest clowns came, of course, from Victoria. Here he is.
Across our state, we have championed the AstraZeneca vaccine, and anyone who suggests otherwise is simply wrong. 940,000 double-dosed Victorians with AstraZeneca. It is safe. It is effective. Go online right now. There are literally thousands of AstraZeneca appointments available for you.
But the comedians at the COVID clown show weren't just happy to reassure you that AstraZeneca was 100% safe. They also ran with the line that if you were unvaccinated, you were to blame for the pandemic.
It just confirms that this really is a pandemic now of the unvaccinated.
There is ample supply of AstraZeneca. So anybody should come forward and get vaccinated. We don't want to see anybody vulnerable without vaccine. Vaccines, I mean, this is, I've said a couple of times, really a pandemic and epidemic of the unvaccinated.
Oh, really? You got that? A pandemic of the unvaccinated. Talk about abusing your position of authority and demonising innocent people. Oh, sorry, ScoMo disagrees.
You know, we live in a country where we're not going to go around demonising those who want to make their own choices. I think that's very important. That's not how our government sees it.
Said it with a straight face again. Confused you will be, of course. Many of our best performers were simply stealing their lines from all those COVID clowns overseas. But still, remind me again, who were the culprits in all of this clown show?
You are the unvaccinated. You are the problem. It is the unvaccinated who are the problem, period, end of story.
The only people that you can blame, this isn't shaming, this is the truth. Maybe they should be shamed, are the unvaccinated.
It's time to start blaming the unvaccinated folks, not the regular folks.
Anyone you came into contact with will blame you, as will the rest of us who have done the right thing by getting vaccinated.
Because frankly, we know that we can't trust the unvaccinated.
I think it's time to get our moral house in order, Anderson. It's the unvaccinated who are the threat.
Right, thank you. The unvaccinated are the threat, yes. Here's former British Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair joining in this public lynching.
It's clear, vaccination works. The absence of vaccination, your failure to get vaccinated doesn't just put you at risk. I think this is what is important. In a way, if this were just a personal decision for people, and you get vaccinated, you don't get vaccinated, it's you who suffers if you don't. But it's not you who suffers if you don't, simply. It's also other people. To get vaccinated is actually part of your, it's almost part of your civic duty.
By the way, everything that clown said in that clip was complete nonsense. We now know that the vaccines were never initially tested for preventing transmission, and indeed, they did not do so. Here is a hilarious but tragic compilation of the history of those public assurances about the efficacy of the vaccines in different contexts, taken from news headlines starting at 100% effective for certain studies until, well, just watch. And on it went until just last week the mainstream media were announcing this.
The major COVID vaccine is being withdrawn from the global market after its makers admitted it can lead to a very serious side effect. About 13 million doses of the AstraZeneca jab were administered in this country, but the company has now officially withdrawn it from all markets.
It comes as the drug maker faces a major class action in the UK where it admitted in court their vaccine can lead to fatal blood clots in those who received it.
Well, and even funnier or more tragic was this. Here's Chris Cuomo back in 2020 during COVID demonising people who were taking ivermectin as a preventative medicine.
People who are injecting drugs for animals and horse.
And people telling them to. Oh, my God. What person? You know, you talk about, cancel culture and who to shame. Ivermectin, a dewormer. Really?
They are shaming themselves. No one has to shame them. They're shaming themselves.
No, they need to be shamed.
Yeah.
They need to be called out and shamed. Yeah.
Called out and shamed. And yet here is the very same Chris Cuomo just last week on Joe Rogan.
I'll tell you something else that's going to get you a lot of hits. I am taking a, what do they call it? Like a regular dose, whatever. They're trying to build up of ivermectin. Ivermectin was a boogeyman early on in COVID.
You couldn't talk about it.
That was wrong. We were given bad information about ivermectin. The real question is why?
Yes, and I'd like to know why too, because I was one of those people who was shamed and defamed and demonised, along with Rita in the Australian Senate, no less for comments I had made on this show about ivermectin. Will those leftist grubs in the Senate apologise to me? I won't hold my breath. How the worm, or rather the worm tablet, has now turned. Off-label prescribing of ivermectin is now no longer banned in Australia, although the TGA does not endorse it for the treatment or prevention of COVID-19. AstraZeneca has been withdrawn. Meanwhile, as Rita spoke earlier, in Victoria, a judge this week slammed police for their unjustified violence. Yes, that's right, unjustified violence at COVID lockdown protests. And the former Liberal Health Minister, Greg Hunt, has attacked the states and territories, looking like it's all happening now, for taking unilateral decisions during COVID that were not backed up by science, says Greg. What a farce. The COVID clown show rumbles on, and don't think we've heard the last of it yet. Personally, I believe we need a royal commission into the abuse of power during COVID, the abuse of power by politicians, scientists, public servants, medical bureaucrats, and big pharma. And following that, I believe some of the worst of the COVID clowns should be behind bars. Or as Paul McCartney would say, sent inside forever.
Stuck inside these four walls, sent inside forever, never seeing no one.
Hyperbole, extreme exaggeration, hyperbole, Rita, Eurovision Song Contest. Tell us about it.
Yes, that's been run and won, but so much controversy this year because Israel made the finals and so many of the artists taking part have been horrendous to this poor girl who was booed throughout the performance. She was apparently in tears afterwards. And one of those leading this sort of anti-Israel sentiment is the Irish contestant. Let's have a look at her. She thinks she's special.
Do you know what makes me special? I'm a queer. And I'm a witch!
Well done, Ireland. That's the best you got. And but she wasn't all that happy when she heard that Israel had done particularly well.
I cried with my team.
What's interesting, because with Eurovision, there's the jury vote and then there's the audience vote, the different countries vote. And it was the audience vote that really boosted the Israeli performer. So I think she finished 5th overall. She was only 12th after the jury vote. So that tells you something. But I'm hearing Australia, which also participates somehow in Eurovision, it gave its jury votes to that Irish lass.
Great. Classy, classy. Let's talk about Waitrose, James.
Well, yeah, look, this is something here I thought was pretty interesting, and I think it ties in, Rowan, to an awful lot of stuff you've spoken about on climate and various policies that are coming. They've said the era of cheap food is over. This is the head of a supermarket because, of course, climate change is going to make it impossible to have cheap food anymore. This is, of course, the great kind of anti-human agenda that's at work behind all of this stuff. You know, most people would think cheap food, feed people, people don't starve, this is great, human civilization flourishing. There's this mentality that cheap food is bad because people get eaten. We're going to have more people. That's terrible.
They hate us. They hate us.
They hate us.
It's
they hate
insane.
you.
And they hate the poor people. They want the poor people to suffer the most. But talking about food or quality food, the good news, Rita, is to do with the world of Australian cakes, which have a long and proud history, apparently.
Well, yeah, apparently this is the sort of Bruce Pascoe view of history that the ABC has embraced, because apparently our traditions of cake making stretch back thousands of years. So that's just something else that I didn't know until this new revisionism that is being just
Is there a recipe? Is there a woman's recipe for a woman's weekly recipe for a cake going back thousands of years? Great stuff. Just quickly want to have a look at these two Irish girl. I think they're Irish, are they? Being quizzed about Gaza. This is grooming. This is child abuse. Have a listen. They might be in England, actually.
I'm 10 years old and I'm supporting Palestine because it's not fair to just literally just kill people for the sake of it. They're saying that they're Jews, but they aren't, because Jewish people, some do support Palestine. They're actually Zionists and that this is a genocide, so, you know, why not?
Can you tell me about the history of Palestine?
The history of Palestine is in 1948, the UN made a plan to make Palestine Israel's and create the state of Israel, which is not true. By doing this, they killed the Palestinians to make only Israel people in that state.
Oh dear.
That's England for you. Happy Mother's Day. And that's it for Outsiders. We'll see you next Sunday at 9 a.m. Thanks for watching. See ya.